I'm continuing my reading, and what I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am reading in a chronological order of events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a bit as I move along. Right now, I am nearing the end of the second book of Samuel. This video will be 2 Samuel chapter 23. This is right near the end of David's life. We're in the last few years, possibly the last year by this point. His later life, after his affair with Bathsheba, his later life has just been downhill ever since. And we get the last few things for him. But I think these last chapters, like chapter 22, I think was appended to near the end. But I think it was actually written, it was a psalm written by David. I think it was written earlier on in his life, but it was appended to the end to give somewhat of a better perspective of David. I mean, if all we were reading was these great wars and some of his worst blunders, his life would be kind of a pathetic thing. But we end with reminding ourselves that he was a great man. And even though in these later years he made some really bad choices, he still had wisdom. He was still a great man for most of his life. So I think that's where we're at here with chapter 23 again. Let us read this. David spoke by the power of the Holy Ghost. Rulers must be just, ruling in the fear of God. David's mighty men are named and their deeds extolled. Okay. Now these be the last words of David. David, the son of Jesse, said, and the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of God, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel, said. Pause. The Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spake to me, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he shall be as the light of the morning when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain. Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things, and sure. For this is all my salvation, and all my desire, although he make it not to grow. So, first of all, I was wrong. This is clearly his last words. But it's kind of a sad thing. But now, was this something that God told him before, and he's just repeating a revelation that he had when he was younger? Or is this a new revelation? Because as far as I can tell, for most of the time, after the murder of Uriah, he seems to have lost the Spirit, and he didn't have revelation. But this seems that he does. He might have had this final revelation. And he's saying, look, you got to be just. He's actually kind of condemning himself in this. Because he says that although my house be not so with God. In other words, my house hasn't been just. We failed. But even though we failed, I have an everlasting covenant. And that's all he has now. He has the covenant that Christ will come through his line. And that his line will remain the kings in Israel. But he's lost everything else. And that's what he says, though he make it not to grow, it will not pass beyond this life. Let us continue, verse 6. But the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man that shall touch them must be fenced with iron and the staff of a spear. And they shall be utterly burned with fire in the same place. Now remember, the sons of Belial, this just is a reference to the wicked men, people whose desires are wicked. And he's saying, look, if you're going to be going against these guys, you've got to be prepared. People who seek after wickedness, you've got to be prepared to go against them. You can't just hope. But anyways, the rest of this chapter is extolling the virtues of David's mighty men. And I was going to read this all as one video, but I think I'll leave that one here for now, because I want to talk a little bit about David. David is one of the most, you could say, tragic. I don't think it's really tragedy in that David made a choice and now he has to deal with it. To me, tragedy is things that happen to us, not because of our own actions. Dying in a natural disaster, that's a tragedy. There are some things that are a tragedy to us, but not to others, because it was their choice that caused us suffering. And so it's tragic for us, but not for them. With David, he made a choice. So I don't use the word, I don't like using the word tragic, but it is very sad what happened with David. He started off such a great man. And I love these final words of David. This is like he's telling his son, this is how we need to. He's not just telling him that. I think this is his final address to the nation, to the people of Israel. And he's saying, look, you need kings that are just. And I failed you. Now, he was a great king when he first became king. He was a magnificent king. Definitely better than Saul. But as we've seen in a lot of his Psalms, as we're reading through them, I've noticed, as I pointed out, that he had a kind of arrogance to him, a kind of this idea that it was impossible for him to fall. He could not. God would not let him fall. And as I said in my video discussing in more detail the story of Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, I do think, to a large extent, I think primarily his concern wasn't about himself. Because he didn't think he could fall. His thought was, it doesn't matter. God made me king. God is going to uphold me no matter what I do. But if the people find out, it can cause a divide among the people. We can create a civil war if the people find out. And so the cover-up and the murder of Uriah was done I honestly do think that was, in his mind, it was what was necessary to preserve the kingdom. Because God would not let him fall. God would not God would uphold any decision he made. That's what his thought was. Whatever I do, God is going to sanction it. And so he went and he murdered Uriah. And he thought he was there. He thought God would approve, in a sense. And when Nathan came and said, David, he gives the parable of the ewe lamb, and he says, David, you blew it. David realizes that his own arrogance has made him has brought him to this end. And he's, to a large extent, some of the blunders he makes later on, like when he flees from Absalom, leaving Jerusalem, he didn't need to. He had his army with him. He could have defended it. They were all great warriors. They could have probably defended the city against Absalom. But his pride and arrogance had caused his fall. And so now he is trying to show just a heightened humility, saying, God has decreed this, God has made this happen, and I must submit to God. I must show myself humble before God. And he kind of goes into the extreme the other way. Like when he tells him to leave Shimei alone, when Shimei is cursing and throwing stones at him, he says, leave him alone. He's part of what God sent to punish me. God didn't send him. Well, at least it's unlikely that God sent him. And he should have been gotten rid of. But David is trying to now, he's gone to the other extreme. As I said, he became very proud and arrogant because God was upholding, God was protecting him. And he thought, God will never let me fall. And once he did fall, he went to the other extreme, saying, if I just humble myself and don't fight against God, if I do nothing to prevent God, to try to get away from God's judgment, then maybe I can get some mercy back for me, you know? And it caused him to just commit blunder after blunder in his, and I don't know, it's just, you know, maybe I will call it a tragedy. Because as the ancient Greeks said, there's the idea of the tragic flaw in character. It's not exactly something that you choose, but it's something about your personality that will eventually destroy you. And I think that's what we see with David. He was a true tragic hero in that he had that tragic flaw, that he let power go to his head. His pride and arrogance, as it says, you know, in Proverbs, I believe it is, pride goeth before the fall. And that's what we see with David. A tragic flaw that leads to his downfall. I don't know, of all the characters in the Bible, I think that David is the one that, I don't know, I can't say that I exactly sympathize with him, but he is the most, I don't know exactly how to put it, but your feelings go out to him a little more because he was such a great man. And he fell almost completely. He barely avoided the final fall into the pit. But just barely. But anyways, I'm going to leave that here, and we'll read a little bit about David's mighty men in the next video.